G'day, I'm Scott McGregor, and would you believe it? Here I am, back on a train.
The Indian Pacific sets out from Sydney, on Australia's east coast. I've joined it at Broken Hill, close to the South Australian border. Now, we're heading west to Perth.
I'm well into South Australian territory now. And if I wanted to, I could get off at Adelaide and spend a few lazy hours there before getting back on the train and shooting across the Nullarbor to Perth. That'd be a bit boring, wouldn't it? After all, South Australia's got so much to offer. And some great train rides too.
In this episode, the Indian Pacific will take me to Adelaide, where there's a couple of top day trips to be had. Then we'll hop on board Australia's other great train journey, the Ghan to Alice Springs, and discover the colourful history behind this great old line. But first stop, Peterborough. Now, as you probably know by now, I'm a bit of a history buff, and there's something up at the old roundhouse that I really want to see. And no, it's not a train. It's what they run on, the tracks. And I've got to say that back in the early days, when our rail network was being built, the coordination between the states concerning the tracks was appalling.
For example, when it came time to decide the width of the track the train should run on, that's the gauge I'm talking about, everybody virtually went their own way and built what they liked. It'd be fair to say that the self-interests of the states overrode the desires of national unity. Sound familiar?
In concluding this report, I am desirous of alluding to the fact that there is a diversity of gauges that exist between this and the other colonies of Australia. The magnitude of the evils that must ultimately arise at no distant period and be entailed upon the future inhabitants of the colonies from this circumstance can hardly be overrated. And I would therefore submit that it is a question deserving the attentions of the various governments. Gotha K. Mann, Railway Commissioner, New South Wales Railways, 1856.
It wasn't until 1970 that the line from Sydney to Perth was finally standardised. That's the line we're running along now. It was a mess all round. It certainly hindered our economic development. This is one of the famous South Australian triple gauge yards, where goods came in on one gauge and had to be transferred over onto another. In Peterborough, there are no less than 3 gauges. On this turntable, there's broad, standard and narrow gauge. It made carting goods by rail very inefficient, and you can see how road transport soon came to dominate the freight industry. The author of that report had the right idea, but nobody in power listened to him. And 150 years later, we're still paying for it.
When the yards closed in 1993, the government handed everything over to the local train society, better known as Steamtown. Workshops, facilities, the lot. A dream come true, you might say. But I'm told it's a bit of a battle to find the funds to maintain the place.
They do it by running a very enjoyable train ride, using this old West Australian W-class loco, and the carriages are from the old Ghan.
We're heading up towards the beautiful rolling hills of the mid-north. In good years, the wheat and sheep farming here is very good. But you get a couple of poor seasons and, well, it's reflected in the landscape, isn't it? With the wind whistling across the flat countryside like this, makes me think of the early settlers and the tough, lonely conditions they endured.
Hey, having a good time? Fun, isn't it?
The train turns around at a lonely little place called Blackrock. The old pub, now a cafe and restaurant, boasts the only cappuccino machine in South Australia's mid-north. The coffee's good too. So if you're ever up this way, drop in and go for a ride. Adelaide. I have a few things planned for us here before we head north. This is Keswick Terminal. As you can see, it's pretty new.
New railway stations leave me a bit cold. I don't know, it's like they don't evoke the spirit of train travel or something. I know a place that does, though.
Adelaide's a funny old place. Being the youngest colony in the nation and the only one that came about through some intensive planning, in other words, no penal colony here, thank you very much, it's very ordered. It still has quite a provincial air about it, which I like.
Now this is what I call a railway station. It's classic American style. Looks like it was inspired by Grand Central itself. This grand edifice was built by American railwayman, Commissioner William Alfred Webb in the 1920s. He was brought in to rejuvenate a declining and worn-out railway system.
Bill did a good job. He had some big ideas though, and this was one of them. He built it and nearly sent the state broke in the process.
That's because the size and the facilities of this place were more suited to a large city like Philadelphia than a small state capital like Adelaide. Never mind. It's here now.
Except for the small local domestic train service, they don't use this place as a real railway station anymore. So, what do you do with all this extra space?
You turn it into a casino, of course.
They've done a good job, though, in retaining the feel and character of the old railway station. This restaurant used to be the Commissioner's office. Not a bad-sized office when you consider this restaurant was converted without knocking down any walls. One very interesting train does still leave from Adelaide railway station.
These are the Bluebird rail cars. My carriage is called the Plover.
Now, why didn't somebody think of this a long time ago? A train trip to the Barossa Valley, the South Australian homeland of fine wine and good living. The Bluebird fleet was once the mainstay of the state's country passenger services.
Withdrawn from service in 1991, these cars lay idle until somebody had the brilliant idea to use them as a day tripper service up to the Barossa Valley.
Now everyone can have a great day in the valley. And because your transport's all taken care of, you don't have to draw straws to see who's going to drive the car home. But back to steam power. And how's this for style? She's a mighty 520 class engine, built right here in South Australia during World War II. She might be nearing 60 now, but she was state-of-the-art in steam at the time. Fast and powerful. Of course, the most unique feature of these engines was their very sexy streamlining. The 520s were very successful, and when the diesels started taking over in the 1950s, these engines were kept in service. In fact, they were the last mainline passenger steam locomotives to see active service in the state. This loco belongs to Steam Ranger, who run a number of tourist trains from Mount Barker in the Adelaide Hills to destinations on the Fleurieu Peninsula, as far south as Victor Harbour. This trip is called the Southern Encounter. The Cockle train, another one of Steam Ranger's services, does a short return trip from Victor Harbour to Goolwa on Lake Alexandrina. Part of the line travels along the foreshore between Victor Harbour and Port Elliot, practically in the sandhills, which is quite a unique experience. Then through the rolling green pastures to Goolwa. Now the real fun starts. I'm back at Keswick Terminal, the departure point for the Ghan to Alice Springs. This would have to be one of the world's great trains, with a wealth of history attached to it. I can hardly wait to get on board.
Hi there, how are you?
Very well, thanks.
Good, we're travelling in C1 and 2. It's the first cabin in on the right.
The Udnada car, no less.
Udnada car. Excellent, there we go. It's
Looks
just
good.
this way, thank you, Steve.
The journey from Adelaide to Alice Springs takes 20 hours, 972 miles, through some of the world's most beautiful, but sometimes inhospitable country.
Sometimes it's fun to look backwards, particularly when you're leaving a city. Bye, Adelaide. This particular service is so popular that Great Southern Railways have decided to double the length of the train. It's 30 carriages all up, 2 club cars, 2 restaurant cars. There's 1,500 tonnes, 350 people on the train. It's a popular train.
Long-distance trains are a bit like guest houses on rails. Once the excitement of leaving the station is over, it's a short stroll from your sleeper to the club car to sit around and chat, or contemplate the passing scenery. And as you can see, there's no shortage of that on this journey. Then when your sitting is called, it's off to the dining car for a very satisfying meal. There's not much else to do, really. And for the experienced train traveller, it's just the way they like it.
We've just left Tarcoola. This is the point where the Ghan separates from the transcontinental and heads north up to Alice Springs. Somewhere out there in the night is the Woomera rocket range.
Woomera was established after World War II by Britain and Australia to further develop the rocket technology begun by the Germans. Back in the 50s, Britain wished to develop her own nuclear weapons, so Woomera was chosen as a testing ground because it was so remote. Then in 1960, the British suddenly abandoned their nuclear development program in favour of buying American weapons. Overnight, Woomera died. And except for some involvement in the development of satellite launching vehicles, the place fell into disuse. But now, after more than 30 years, our space dreams have come alive once more, and Woomera is in the process of being reactivated to launch locally designed and built satellites into orbit.
This is opal mining territory. The train doesn't stop here, unfortunately, but just out there to the east is the opal mining town of Kubapidi.
If it wasn't for the blue sky, you'd think Kubapidi was on the moon rather than the Earth. The mullock heaps from the diggings make the place look like it belongs to another planet. It's quite a town now, but I remember coming here when I was a kid and being kept awake all night by the sound of gunfire in the diggings. They were a fiery lot back then. The big attraction, of course, is the opal. And in the early days, people came here and put up with the hottest and harshest conditions to have a go at mining for it. The early miners started living underground, and the locals reckon it's still the best way to live, because the temperature remains cool and constant all year round.
Good morning. We're now well and truly in the red centre. The McDonald Ranges are coming up shortly, which means the Alice is not far up the line. I smell adventure ahead. And bacon and eggs. As I said earlier, there's a real wealth of history behind this line.
It's all about tough, adventurous people and their determination to tame a harsh and unforgiving environment, the effects of isolation and the tyranny of distance.
I've got to tell you, this is not the original Ghan line. The old line's a fair bit to the east. This is relatively new. It was constructed in 1980.
The original line followed the inland trail of the explorer John McDurl Stewart and the Afghan camel trains that followed him. It runs along the base of the Flinders Ranges and south of Lake Eyre, but it had to be shifted because it was prone to flooding in the wet. The train takes its name, of course, from the Afghan cameleers who did so much to open up this country. Long before the railway came along, camel teams supplied the telegraph and the pastoral stations, no matter how isolated or far away they were. But that's another story.
They moved the line for good reason, but it's on the old line where the good stories lie. And that's what I plan to do when I get to Alice, is trace the old line all the way back down to Port Augusta.
Whichever way you turn up here, you keep coming back to the landscape. Scorched by the hot sun and eroded by millions of years of wind and rain, the Red Centre is a special place. It used to be known as the dead heart of Australia, but that's never been true. The country is far from dead, and once you start looking, you'll discover an abundance of wildlife. Alice Springs is the unofficial capital of the Red Centre. It's a small town, only about 20,000 people, but with a lot of character. Originally established as a relay station for the Overland Telegraph, it was named Alice after the wife of the Postmaster General of South Australia, Sir Charles Todd. The Overland Telegraph, of course, was the only transcontinental venture that actually did make it all the way from Adelaide to Darwin, unlike the railway. The telegraph line was instrumental in opening up Central Australia. Its repeater stations offered safe havens to travellers, and its chain of waterholes formed a corridor for the movement of pastoralists into the region. It was completed in 1872. Before then, the quickest way to communicate with England was by ship, and that took about 3 months. Once the telegraph line was up, a message could be sent in a couple of hours. That was a giant leap forward at the time. To the Aboriginals, the single-strand line was known as the singing wire because of the noise it made in the wind.
When they built the Overland Telegraph, they followed John McDowell Stuart's original exploration route north. And then when they built the old Gan line, they followed the telegraph.
It seemed like a good idea at the time, but railways are a different proposition to telegraph lines.
In 1929, the line finally reached Alice Springs, and there it stopped. There's been numerous proposals ever since to extend the line to link up with a Northern Australian railway that had been built south from Darwin a short distance. Sadly, nothing's happened. I don't think there's been a South Australian or Northern Territory election where the issue of a north-south transcontinental railway hasn't been dragged out of the cupboard and presented to the people. I think the locals take the view that they'll believe it when they see it.
Time to head south. This is the Old Gan Preservation Society, just outside Alice Springs. They've got about 15 miles of the original Old Gan track that runs down to a place called Yueniga Siding. At least it'll get us started, I guess. Other than this and a few remnants, there's not much left until you get down to Quorn, roughly 750 miles away in the lower Flinders Ranges. It's an irony that such a desolate area can be so flood-prone, but it's a fact. Track washouts were common. A 2-day journey could turn into 2 weeks quite easily. Drivers had to carry guns to shoot wild goats so that they could feed the passengers if they became stranded for too long. There are stories of people hopping down from the train while it slowly crept along over the damaged track to pick wildflowers, which sprang up everywhere after a good soaking. In the end, the line virtually destroyed itself because it was just too costly to keep open.
When they closed the line, they pulled up most of the track, which under normal circumstances would cause me a few problems. but I've decided to draw on experiences of the past for this one. I love this. Look, my very own camel train, complete with provisions and swag to take me down the line. This is Daisy, and this is Saeed. Two healthy-looking camels. They should get me down to Port Augusta, no problems.
The route of the old line passes through some very evocative place names on the way. Udnada, Algie-Buckner, William Creek, Coward Springs, Maree, Farina, Lindhurst, Quorn. Some of these places are just ruins now, abandoned long ago. Others are still viable townships, but nothing like the hives of activity they were when the railway came through.
The railway finally reached Udnada in 1891. Considering construction started in Port Augusta 13 years earlier, it took a fair while to get there.
Up until 1929, the only way to get to Alice Springs was by a 6-day camel ride. When the railway arrived, and for the next 40 years, the town was a hive of activity, the railhead for all points north.
I can see why the old cameleers chose to walk a lot. Bit hard in the old backside. You know.
Even though the old line has gone, there's plenty of evidence to show where it went. This is the Algie-Buckner Bridge. It's 1,873 feet long and was fabricated in England. The interesting thing about this bridge is that it was never meant to be here in the first place. The intention was to ship it out to Australia and use it to span the River Murray. But when it arrived, they found it was too short. So it ended up here at Algie-Buckner. Now the only thing missing is the old Ghan itself.
William Creek. This would have to be one of the most famous watering holes in the country.
Where else can you park your plane in the main street and stroll into the pub for a cool drink? Recently, the William Creek Hotel was deemed so important to our outback history that it was placed on the National Heritage List. The place is decorated with the mementos of the many visitors who have quenched their thirsts here. Publican Malcolm Anderson is proud of the hotel's history.
Been hanging up there for quite some years now, probably 30, 40, maybe even 50 or longer years.
Now, talking of history, what's the story behind the pub?
The pub was built in 1887 to service the Ghan railway line. It's a unique pub.
What makes it unique?
The total of the pub that you can see from the outside has never been burnt down. Historically speaking, I'd say that most pubs in Australia, and old pubs in Australia, have been burnt down a couple of times. This place is what you see now is what it was in 1887. It's definitely unique. It's in the middle of nowhere, or you could put it another way, it's in the middle of everywhere because it's pretty central.
So when the temperature's 50 degrees outside, how do we keep the beer cold? Are we going all right?
It's difficult, but it can be done.
In outback terms, William Creek is right next door to one of Australia's true natural wonders, Lake Eyre. And the best way to take a look at it is from the air. My pilot, Jerry Waddington.
Oh, well, yeah, we'll head directly out to London. It's about 60 kilometres from where we are, so it's a little bit of a run out. But Not too far.
I suppose you've seen Lake Eyre in all sorts of conditions.
Yeah, just about every condition. It's dry at the moment. There's a little bit of water in the south end of the North Lake. But last year, February last year, we had about 6 inches of rain in a matter of 2 weeks.
Yeah?
And that filled the lake.
Gee, that'd be fairly impressive because it is up there with one of the biggest lakes in the world, isn't it?
It is, yes, it is. And it's also the lowest point in Australia, which is 15 metres below sea level.
Right.
Yeah.
Can we land on it?
No, I wouldn't like to put this on it, no.
Right.
Not suitable for landing maybe, but we're flying over the dry, salt-encrusted surface of the lake where in 1964, Sir Donald Campbell set his world land speed record in his jet-powered car, Bluebird. The lake was discovered in 1840 by the explorer Edward Charles Eyre, after whom it's named. It's now part of a 1.25 million hectare national park. It seems Jerry has only just turned the plane back towards William Creek when there below is the line of the old Ghan. It's time to come back down to earth, swap engines for camel power and rejoin Daisy for the next leg of my journey. Neither the railway or the pastoralists could survive in this harsh climate without a regular supply of water. Rainwater doesn't hang around on the surface for long out here, so they had to look elsewhere. They found water at little places like this, Coward Springs, an oasis in the middle of the desert.
This is what's brought the pastoralists to this region and what's kept them here. Water. From the largest underground water supply in the world. The Great Artesian Basin. This is what's called a controlled bore. Pressure's really strong too. Pastoralists love these things because they didn't have to whack up a windmill.
Right from the early days, bores were sunk and capped with a valve. If this wasn't done, the flow of water and the pressure would be too strong. The precious fluid would quickly waste away.
I think I'll stay here a while. See you down the track a bit.
At least I won't get lost following the old Ghan's permanent way like this. Idna, Daisy?
Ah, Marie, at last. Hush, 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 hush. Yes, 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 I know how you feel. Dust is driving me mad too. Marie's quite an historic place. Big transshipment point from the standard gauge to the narrow gauge. Bit of history about the camels too, worth checking out.
In 1866, 100 camels and 31 cameleers arrived in Port Augusta. The cameleers became known as Afghans, but they actually came from all over the Middle East. Although their numbers were small, as we've already found out, their contribution was enormous. Without them, the development of the outback would have been much harder. Wherever they went, they lived separately and their areas became known as Ghan towns. Marie's Ghan town still exists, and it remains home to many of the Afghans' descendants. 85-year-old Ahmed Musha is the last of the Maree Cameleers, a tough people working in a tough country.
You have to stand up and eat. Pannikin and a bit of meat and a damper. One chew like a dog. A couple of chews and you swallow down with the tea. The meat was like leather.
Yes.
Yeah, like a rock. If you get a lump of salt meat out and hit a camel in the right place, you'll knock him out. Yeah, that hard.
From Maree, camel trains spread out far and wide, to places in the Northern Territory, New South Wales, and even as far as the West Australian goldfields.
From here, we used to go to Bursville, change your clothes here, 18 days with the same clothes on.
Really?
Time you get there, You take your clothes off, they're standing up. They won't go down, that's stiff. With the camel smell and all that, all mixed together, smell of camel. Once I never took my boots for a month.
The railway, then road transport, eventually ended the camels' working days. Many went bush when they were set free by their owners. They thrived in the desert and became pests. Sadly, many were shot. In recent times, though, thanks to some ardent admirers, the camel has made a big comeback. Though I'm not entirely sure how enthusiastic the camels are about it all. Welcome to the Marie Camel Cup. Because they're straight out of the bush, it means the camels have never done much work, so they're not all that well disciplined as far as the races go.
And they get on the racetrack and the gun goes and their eyes go as big as dinner plates and they just go like hell, you know.
Oh, right. When the gun goes off, anything can happen, and does. I think we should find out what makes these people do this. After all, it's not exactly horse racing, is it?
As I ride racehorses and stuff, you sort of ride the old camels for a bit of adrenaline pump.
What's the difference between horses and camels?
Well, I reckon that camels are quieter than horses. Horses are a lot more higher spirited. They go very fast and they're very quick off the mark, but it's the fun of being able to camp out, the atmosphere of the bush. It sort of brings it all out in us, and down to heart we all the same, you know. We like a bit of camping, we like a bit of fun.
During the day, a series of heats are held to decide who'll be in the race for the grand prize, the Marie Camel Cup. There's a bit at stake here. In addition to the cup itself, there's the prestige of being race champion for a year, not to mention a handy little cash prize. I better check out the form if I'm going to put some of my hard-earned on it.
He won the Marie Cup last year here.
And Unique, the name,
Yeah,
does it mean anything?
Yeah, well, it means he's not either one or the other, is it?
Good,
Oh yeah, the supreme sacrifice. Still, Unique is a champion and a proven winner. Who's next? I'm looking for Phoenix. Sounds a bit mysterious.
I'm trying to pick camel form. I don't know if I'm on the right track here. I think it's all in the muzzle, isn't it?
No, I think it's luck in the day.
It's the luck of the day, is it? Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, well, you're
pretty
having a
tight-lipped now, Greg. I wonder if that means anything. Anyway, I better see what me old mate the jockey's got to say.
Who you be riding?
Greyhound, I think.
Greyhound?
Yeah.
I haven't heard of Greyhound before. Check him out.
Let's hope the bastard runs like a greyhound.
It's going to be hard to pick this, but I've got a bit of a feeling about Phoenix. I must say, this is one of the most relaxed race meetings I've ever been to.
Can I buy a couple of Calcuttas?
Certainly.
Yeah.
$2 a ticket.
All right. There we go.
The Marie races are managed by the locals, with all the profits going back to the community. The prize money's not big, but somehow I don't think the locals really care about the money. It's like the jockey said. We all like to have a bit of fun. Out here, you've got to make your own fun. And that's what this day is really all about. Still, as they lead their camels to the starting line for the running of the cup, there's definitely a whiff of tension in the air. Come on, Phoenix. Come on, Phoenix. Come on. Hey, come on. Oh, he's done it. Phoenix has won the cup.
There you go, lucky day, eh?
Congratulations, mate. Excellent. Hey? We said he'd do it. We said he'd do it.
Amazing boy.
Hey? So it's all in the head.
Where's that jockey?
We won't say anything about the trainer, but the jockeying was excellent. The
jockey-
top job. That was a top ride, mate. Congratulations. That was an excellent ride. You got a jockey in you for sure. Well done, son.
Yeah, he started a bit behind and he weaved him through, didn't whip him. And then came home all right, eh?
And then came home all right. You're a happy man.
I'm a very happy man.
Yeah. Pays a few bills as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
By the honour vested in me, I give you this, Greg.
No worries.
Well done, son.
Okay. Cheers.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
good bit
Thank
of
you.
work.
And this is the boy.
And this is the boy. He's the winner.
Phoenix from the ashes.
Over time, Maree's fortunes have waxed and waned with those of the camel, pastoral and railway industries. Known as Herget Springs before World War I, it was dropped because of the ill feeling towards Germany. Maree was a great railway town during the time of the Old Gan. Butch Bijar started as a sweeper and ended up being the last station master at Maree.
When it's really busy times, you have trains on either side of these lines, one on each side. And
this is the amazing thing at Maree. It was actually the change of gauge, wasn't
everything.
it? Everything.
Everything from the food, from a tin of peas on the Gan to a leg of ham or leg of beef, whatever, went over. Everything was transferred across.
As far as life here was concerned, what was it like?
Oh, it was a ball here. The
Yeah.
place was really a big place. There's a lot of people around, always heaps of different nationalities, and
Oh, yeah,
so on. It was really good.
And so these old locos kicking around in Maree, they're still, their early 50s, original?
Yep, original ones.
Oh, dear.
Done a few Ks, a few miles on them.
Oh, it's good they left them here, isn't it? Bit of history for us.
Yeah, no, they're really good.
Back to the Old Gan.
You can see just how vulnerable this line was in a flood. After a heavy downpour, the water would just roar through here. I've seen a photo of this bridge with the water up to where I'm sitting. Further down the line, there's another example of just how harsh this country can be.
This is Farina, another former railhead. 300 people called Farina home once. The original plan when it was settled in 1878 was to grow wheat here, but the climate was just not suited to it. When I come to a place like this, I can't help thinking about the people who once lived here, why they came here, what their aspirations were. Bits and pieces of their lives are strewn all over the place. An old car body over there, a bed head. The old baker's oven is still here. Even the glass heap tells a story.
Every one of these bottles is a French champagne bottle. Look at this. You'd think they were living in the lap of luxury. But actually, there's another story to it. Apparently, the story goes, they used to have these bottles sent up from Adelaide and put other less expensive liquids in them. Still, somebody in Adelaide was having a pretty good time. Anyway, I've got to keep my train onto its timetable. I've got an appointment to keep.
While I'm in Lindhurst, I want you to meet a genuine bush philosopher whose wonderful works of art are on show here. I've come to see Talc Alf, as he likes to be called.
G'day. How you going?
All right, I'm Scott.
Good. How do you do, Scott? Good.
Hey,
Alf is a
you've got
wealth of
great
bush
setup here.
knowledge, and he expresses his knowledge and his beliefs through carvings in local talc stone.
Now, some people write books and put their thoughts together. I thought I'd make mine out of talc.
Right.
It's all sort of self-taught stuff.
Yeah.
I'll start off with the Aboriginal people, the original inhabitants of the land,
Oh, yeah.
looking at the boat people, and then the convicts over there in Sydney. Then I made one for the soldiers of the land, with the Aboriginal flag and the Southern Cross combined, because that is the soul of the people, the sun and the Southern Cross. And over the years I've sort of looked at letters, and every letter has a story to it. And if you look at this one here, this fella here looking at letter J. You ever wondered why J is in front of the word judge?
No?
Well, there's a reason for it. When we make a decision, we go this way or that way. When we go that way, the decision's made. It's a symbol of decision making.
Oh, okay.
Right, now we come along on this bench here now. I was starting to think about the religions of the world.
Oh, yes.
And I'm a Bush Baptist, I don't belong to any religion, but I'm thinking about religions of the world.
Yes.
And I've come to the conclusion that the word Jesus, all it means is Ye, S for the sun, coming from one horizon to the other, because in that time people thought the world was stationary, and they saw the sun swinging across from one horizon to the other. So the word yes means Ye, sun, and then if you put us, which is us human beings, that's the origin of the word Jesus, means Ye, sun and us.
Do you mind if I get personal and have a look at your hands?
Yeah,
Working
yeah.
with talc all those years, look at that.
Well, they're fairly solid. Yeah, they're not.
Alf's got the smoothest hands of any man I've ever met. They're like baby's bottoms, if you don't mind the comment.
No.
Alf's belief that the letters of the alphabet each have meaning has given him an insight into the origin of the very name of our country, Australia.
Yeah, it starts with AU. And I thought in the days when people used to navigate by the sun, it was a golden colour, the sun, and AU is a symbol for gold. So you've got golden sun, and the sun swings from one horizon to the other side, like we said with the Ye's sun and that. So you've got golden sun, and T means rise, top. So the Aus part in Australia means east towards the golden sun rise. That's why the Austrians spell the name Ost like that. That circle represents the sun coming from the east. Yeah, the Egyptian name for the sun is Ra. You heard that before, Ra?
Yeah, of course.
Well, if you throw your arms up and say Ray for it all, that's where the word Rays come from. See, Ray for the Ra. So Ostra means east towards the golden sun, where the great land, and L is a symbol for land because it's level, where the great land is. And there's the origin of the name Terra Australis, east towards the golden sun where the land is. Isn't that a beautiful name?
Yeah. Alf reckons he developed his theories and insights after being by himself in the bush for years on end. Genius or simply another colourful bush character? I'll let you be the judge of that.
Coming up to Quorn. Near the end of the line now. Ibna.
Quorn is a quiet little country town nestling in the lower Flinders Ranges of South Australia's mid-north. A pretty place. It almost looks like a set from a Gumtree movie. Great railway station, by the way. But I'm excited about this place for another reason.
I couldn't ask for a more fitting end to my journey down the old Gan line than a trip on the Pitchy Ritchie Railway.
But first, I'm going to take a ride on this little beauty, affectionately known as the coffee pot. This beautifully restored turn-of-the-century little steam motor coach got its nickname in the 1920s when a couple of extra water tanks strapped on the running board were labelled by one of the railway workers, cocoa and coffee. The nickname coffee pot just sort of stuck because everyone reckoned the boiler wasn't big enough to boil anything other than coffee. But now to something bigger. Besides the track at Alice Springs, where I began my journey south, the Pitchy Ritchie Railway is the only other bit of the old Gan line left, with a train still running on it. It runs from Quorn down to Woolshed Flat, through the Pitchy Ritchie Pass, a distance of about 12 miles. The folks at Pitchy Ritchie are a dedicated bunch of volunteers who, in addition to providing a great train ride, work really hard to preserve the history and culture of the old Gan.
Well, I did it. The old GAN line complete. All I have to do now is wait for the Indian Pacific that'll take me on to Western Australia and my next railway adventure. The platform's a bit dead. Not much happening here anymore. Probably won't be through for the next 3 hours, so that's... well, not much else to do. Might as well kick back and relax. My old man would have got off here and had a cup of tea on his way to the war. Bit of light reading. Rules and regulations. General appendix, the working timetable. West Australian Government Railways, 1953.